Good morning, students. How are you doing? My name is Anshuman. Welcome to Exam B. So today we are going to have a session on reading comprehension. Okay, so let's start with today's session. So I would like you to read this passage in front of you. So this passage contains total 3 paragraphs. I have divided them in 3 different slides, okay, so that it becomes easier for you to read it, okay, and it's clear. So yeah, let's read the passage now. So what is the instruction? Read the following passage, okay, we will go through it and then answer the questions based on it. So we will go through the passage first of all. We will try to understand the passage, okay, that what it says, okay, and what is the theme of the passage, what it talks about. We will try to go in depth of the passage, that each elements of the passage, that what is talking about, okay, and then we will go through the questions and answers, okay. So yeah, let's read. Marion Goldman, 2013, argues that natural kinds are necessary for gathering empirical knowledge and making generalizations about kinds. Okay, so Marion Goldman, we get to know that there is a person called Marion Goldman. Okay, and in 2013, what she argues that the natural kinds are necessary for gathering empirical knowledge. Okay, the word empirical, what does it mean? The word empirical, something that can be observed, right? Something that is, something that is not experimental, but maybe experimental, right? But it doesn't have data, okay? It's purely based on the observation, right? So, Marion Goldman argues what? That the natural kinds are necessary for gathering empirical knowledge and making generalizations about kinds. So, what she says is that when we try to segregate and categorize, when you try to categorize the elements, okay, it may be anything. It may be like, for example, animals. In biology we study about animals, right? So there are different orders in animals, different orders in plants, for example, higher ranking, okay, then lower class, higher class, right? In the same way, right, there are elements which are categorized on the basis of their similarity, right? So what it says, she argued what? That the natural kinds are necessary for gathering empirical knowledge and making generalizations about kinds. That means the natural kinds, okay, to provide a grounding, okay, this is a separate class and this is a separate class. What we need to do? We need to see the natural kinds. We need to see the kinds. That means the elements, okay, which are already there in the nature, and we need to see their similarity, that how similar they are, so that we can categorize them in one class, okay. According to Goldman 2013, there is a grounding that unites members of a kind, but we need not to know what the grounding is in order to classify something as a natural psychiatric kind, okay. So what it says that in 2013, okay, Goldman argued what? So she said that there is a grounding that unites members of a kind, okay. So what she said is that to categorize, okay, elements or natural kinds in one class, okay, there is the grounding, okay. That means there is a base, okay. So if I need to categorize mammals, right, and who are non-mammals, right, who are not mammals, so how do I say what is the grounding? That mammals give birth, right, while the animals which are not mammals, which do not come under the category of mammals, they lay eggs, right. So this is the similarity, right. In the same way, aquatic plants and the plants which are not aquatic, right? So how can I categorize them? How can I segregate them? That aquatic plants grow in under the water, while the non-aquatic plants cannot grow under the water. So they have their separate properties and they differ from one another, okay, and they also share similar qualities with their own kinds, okay. But we need not know what the grounding is in order to classify something as a natural psychiatric kind. But when we talk about the psychiatric kind, okay, what do you mean by psychiatric kind? Okay, here we are talking about on this passage, something related to the field of psychiatry. Okay, for example, the psychological disorders, or your qualities, your traits, okay, certain things. So when we talk about the psychiatric kind, so the grounding that here we are talking about, that to unite members of same class, grounding is important. But to study what in the psychiatric kind, okay, this grounding, okay, it is not important that we study it. Okay, then Godman 2013 uses the case of the apathetic children. Okay, apathetic means children who, or anyone, okay, apathy, the word apathy means it's the opposite of empathy, right? Where we feel emotions, okay, where we feel something for others. Okay, so on the contrast, apathy is something where we don't feel any emotions, right? So where we are totally indifferent. Okay, so apathetic children would be children with flat affect, or children who do not experience any emotions, or who lack emotions, or who lack the skill to express themselves. Okay, or pathological withdrawal syndrome. Now pathology, okay, this word is related with illness. Okay, so pathological withdrawal syndrome, PWS, to illustrate her point. So Godman, to this to illustrate her point, what she did, she used the case of the apathetic children or pathological withdrawal syndrome. So we get a name of a psychological disorder here, that is called pathological withdrawal syndrome. So in this, what happens, that the person excludes, or he has a social withdrawal, right? So the person, okay, he starts withdrawing himself away from the society, right? And he doesn't engage himself much into the social activities. So he starts living alone. He loses his control in the social settings, okay, to talk with people, to express himself. Okay, so usually in this phase, what happens, the person usually keep himself confined. Okay, so now we read next paragraph. Okay. The aim of this paper is not to dispute Godman's conclusion. In fact, I agree with her general inference that PWS is a psychiatric kind. So now we got to know that there's one researcher, right? Godman. But now the author of this passage, passage says what? That the aim of this paper, okay, it is a paper actually, right? This passage has been taken from paper. Now, the aim of this paper is not to dispute Godman's conclusion. In fact, I agree with her general inference that PWS is a psychiatric kind. Now, what the author is trying to say, that she or he is not trying to argue, okay, the concept that Godman gave, right? The person is not trying to dispute. Okay, dispute means what? A conflict, है ना? ठीक है. So what the author is saying, that he or she in fact what? Agree with her general inference that PWS is a psychiatric kind. Now Godman called the pathological withdrawal syndrome a psychiatric kind. That means whatever this thing is, it lies in the psychiatric field. Okay, so it may be a psychological disorder, it may be something else, but it lies in the psychological aspect, right? So what the author is saying, that yeah, the author agrees that it is a psychiatric kind. However, this paper will argue that Godman 2013 erroneously classifies PWS as its own psychiatric kind, when it should be classified as a variant of depression, which is the psychiatric kind in itself. Okay, so now what the author is saying, that this Godman, okay, Godman has done what? Okay, according to the author, Godman erroneously classifies PWS as its own psychiatric kind. Okay, so own psychiatric kind means that it is a separate class. It doesn't come under something else, but it is a separate class. Okay, it is a separate class. For example, if I say like India, okay, and then India or any other country, for example, America, right? So under India, okay, Gujaratis comes, okay, South Indian comes, right? People from different states will come, right? So in the same way, in America, in USA, people from California, New York, okay, Washington, okay, these people will come under these, right? But India and America, these two are what? Separate kinds, right? So what the author is saying, that he or she disagrees with what? The government's conclusion, right? That this PWS is not a independent psychiatric kind. Okay, it should be what? It should be classified as a variant of depression, okay, which is a psychiatric kind in itself. Now, if you read psychology, if you have a little bit knowledge of psychology, so you get to know that depression, okay, it is a separate mood disorder, right? And then under depression, various types of depression would come, right? So here what the author is saying, that depression is already a psychiatric kind in itself. Now PWS, okay, it should have been come under what? As a variant of depression. That means it should not have been completely presented as its own natural kind. In fact, what it should have been done, it should be classified as a variant of depression. That means PWS comes under depression. It is not totally different psychiatric kind like depression itself. I believe that government 2013 neglects some important points that are made by Rachel Cooper 2010 regarding culture bound syndromes. Now we get a third name here, Rachel Cooper, right? So Rachel Cooper said something in 2010 regarding culture, okay, regarding culture bound syndromes. Cooper 2010 explicates. Now the word explicate means to try to explain something, right? Okay, in depth. The discrepancy is what? Difference, right? That how certain thing differentiate, okay? So Cooper 2010 explicates a discrepancy in symptoms for psychiatric disorders across different cultures, specifically the difference in diagnosis rates in war-torn countries, which is relevant to Goldman's 2013 argument. So what Cooper said actually, okay, what do we mean by culture-bound syndromes, right? That one psychological illness or one psychological disorder, it can affect people differently, okay? It is also based on the culture, right? It is also based on the culture, or it is based on the region. For example, the war-torn countries, okay, like we have Syria, Iraq, right? These types of countries where which undergo prolonged conflicts, right? Which have been going under prolonged wars, right? So here the children or people, they would have a different psychological health. Their condition of their psychological health would be different from the nations who are developed, right? Which are developed, like America, right? Because of many things, that how the war is affecting them, how the poverty is affecting them, how the hunger is affecting them. So these things, these are the factors which affect differently. Now, I arrive at my conclusion by showing that the general symptoms for PWS and depression are similar enough to be lumped under the same umbrella, similar enough. Term depression. Okay, so what the author is saying, that the author finds that PWS, okay, pathological withdrawal syndrome, and depression, these two share their symptoms, okay. Their symptoms are similar enough that we can categorize or we can put them under same umbrella called depression, okay. That means depression and PWS, these are not totally different kinds. In fact, these, okay, come under same umbrella. Coming under same umbrella means that these two share, okay, similarity, and these two relate with each other, while still leaving room for the symptoms and treatment that are unique to PWS. So now, what the author is saying, that though PWS and depression, okay, these two share similar symptoms, but still PWS has few of symptoms which are unique to it, and also the treatment would be different. Okay, so though majorly most of the symptoms, okay, are similar to depression, but few of the symptoms are which are unique, and the treatment would be also different, a bit different. Now we come to last para. With the aim of showing how psychiatric disorders can be natural kinds, Godman 2013 suggests that members of a psychiatric kind share a grounding that allows them to be classified as a kind. Okay, so now what the author is saying, that Godman in 2013, okay, to show what, that psychiatric disorders can be natural kinds, right, that psychiatric disorders exist independently as its own kind. So what she suggests, that members of a psychiatric kind share a grounding that allows them to be classified as a kind. Okay, that members of a psychiatric kind, okay, they share grounding. Okay, that means they share their base. Okay, that means their origin from where those kinds have been developed, right? And then it is classified as a kind. So there are two types of grounding. Okay, so now Godman talks about two kinds of grounding as explained by Godman 2013. One is intrinsic or extrinsic, right? Intrinsic or extrinsic grounding, and the second is historical grounding. So we get to know two types of grounding here. Now, the intrinsic model calls for members of a kind to share an intrinsic property that unites them as a kind and allows us to make generalizations about the kind. Now, the intrinsic model is explained here, right? Intrinsic model calls for members of a kind to share an intrinsic property. What do we mean by the word intrinsic? Intrinsic is something that occurs naturally or that is innate, right? That is, throughout when you were born, right? That is inborn, which is already inside you, right? That unites them as a kind and allows us to make generalizations about the kind. Now, intrinsic model tells us that how we can, categorize or segregate, the elements. It's on the basis of the intrinsic, your internal traits, okay, your inborn traits or your inborn properties, right? Internal properties, right? However, extrinsic grounding, now we talk about extrinsic grounding, is also necessary in some cases where members of a kind are all affected by an external property. So now please note, right, in extrinsic model, okay, the members are affected by what? The external property, while intrinsic model is something that where the members are affected by the internal properties or internal traits. Okay, so on the other hand, the extrinsic grounding depends on what? The external property, such as gravity in the case of meteorological natural kinds. Now, if we talk about the gravity, for example, right? So we have different planets on which there's different, level of the gravitational force. For example, on Earth, okay, we have enough of gravity, right? That's why able to walk. But on moon, okay, the gravity is not that much, right? So it varies, okay, planets to planets. Hence we can say, hence we can also categorize it on that way. So this is an example, right? So gravity is an example here, right? So like gravity, okay, things are differently affected, okay, by what? The gravity. Okay, so now historical grounding on the other hand allows us to make generalizations about the kind based on their family tree. Now it talks about the second type of grounding, that's called historical grounding. Now, historical grounding is based on what? The generalization is done on the basis of their family tree. By family tree means what? The hereditary characteristics or the hereditary traits, okay, what you have inherited from your father, okay, the qualities or the properties that you have inherited from your parents, right, or which are already inborn, okay, because of genetically, right, because you share the same genes. So Godman 2013 concludes that these two types of grounding allow for a permissive account. Permissive means free, something that allows, right, something that's not obligatory, but something that allows, right, permissive Account of natural kinds that is applicable to many types of scientific research, such as psychiatry. Now, these two types of grounding helps us to do what? To do what? To segregate, right? Or to categorize types of to categorize elements in scientific research. So when we talk about doing the scientific research, so these grounding comes, okay? In research, it helps us, okay, to decide that which is a totally independent kind, okay, natural kind, and which share similar symptoms, and which should come under what, and which should be excluded, right? Together, these two types of grounding explain the cluster of properties. Cluster means what? Cluster means an organized structure, right? For example, clusters of stars, right? So an organized structure of properties and the inductive generalizations shared by a member of a kind. Now, inductive means what? Inductive means affected by some law, all right, or which follows certain laws or rules. So together, these two types of grounding explain the cluster of properties and the inductive generalization shared by a member of kind. So these two types of grounding helps us to do what? To understand, okay, to explain or understand the cluster of properties, right? That these are two different things. Now these two different things have, you know, they are separate properties, and these properties differ in this way, okay? So it helps us to do what? Now, I hope you understood each and everything, okay, that was explained in this session, okay, in the passage. Now we come to the questions and answers, okay, based on the passage. So the first question comes, what is extrinsic grounding according to the passage, right? So we just read it, okay, the extrinsic grounding. We just read about extrinsic grounding. So what is the question? What is extrinsic grounding according to the passage? So if you remember what is extrinsic grounding, you know it, right? Extrinsic grounding is also necessary in some cases where members of a kind are affected by what? An external property. We had underlined as well, right? Such as gravity in case of meteorological natural kinds, okay? So we get to know. We were clearly we were very clear about what is intrinsic grounding and what is extrinsic grounding, right? So now, so that's what the question is asking, that what is extrinsic grounding according to the passage. So let's start reading the options. So members share similar internal properties. No, absolutely no. Okay, it's very clear. Internal properties comes under what? The intrinsic grounding. So this won't be. Members are not affected largely by internal properties. Members are not affected largely by internal property. This is something that is different from what the extrinsic grounding is, right? Members are affected by an external property. We saw it, right? So, okay, we keep it, you know, as it is right now. We go to D. Members are not much affected by an external property. We didn't see it. We saw actually the opposite, that they are affected by external property. Members are neither affected by internal nor by external property. We know that they're not affected by internal when it comes to extrinsic grounding, but we know that they are affected by external property, right? So this would be also wrong. So our correct answer would be C, right? Members are affected by an external property when we talk about the extrinsic grounding, okay? Question second. According to the author in the passage, which of the following statements are true? So now you need to check each statement and then you need to answer the which statement, you know, which group of the statement, which pairs of the statement are correct. So pathological withdrawal syndrome, okay, we came across that term, right? Pathological withdrawal syndrome. In fact, in the whole passage, this is the main theme, okay? So pathological withdrawal syndrome is an exclusively different kind. Does it say that? No, right? We know when we move to the paragraph, right? So read this. However, this paper will argue that Godman 2013 erroneously classified PWS as its own psychiatric kind when it should be classified as a variant of depression, which is a psychiatric kind in itself. Then we once again read it. Look at this line. I arrive at my conclusion by showing that the general symptoms for PWS and depression are similar enough to be lumped under the same umbrella term depression. Okay, so what we get to know here, that there is an argumentation going on that whether should we classify PWS as a separate natural kind or should it come under depression. Okay, so pathological withdrawal syndrome is an exclusively different kind? No. It is wrong statement. Pathological withdrawal syndrome is not a kind of its own. Yes, that's what the author is arguing in the passage. Pathological withdrawal syndrome shows unique symptoms to be categorized as a different kind. No, we saw it, right? See, I arrive at my conclusion by showing that the general symptoms for PWS and depression are similar enough. That's why we had underlined the keywords here. So the author is nowhere saying that PWS, okay, has completely different symptoms or unique symptoms to be categorized as a different kind. So this would be also wrong. Okay. Now, pathological withdrawal syndrome shows certain unique symptoms. So that's what the author talks about. That if you go back to the passage, so what the author says, that PWS and depression do not share similar symptoms. Okay, they share similar symptoms. Okay, yet few of the symptoms are unique. Few of the symptoms and treatment are unique to PWS. If you read the last line, okay, while still leaving room for the symptoms and treatment that are unique to PWS. So it would be correct. Now, pathological withdrawal syndrome should be a variant of depression, right? So do we read it? Okay. See, PWS has its own psychiatric kind when it should be classified as a variant of depression. So according to the author, okay, the depression, the PWS, okay, it should be a variant of depression. Okay, so pathological withdrawal syndrome should be a variant of depression. Correct. So see how many are correct? B, D and E. So let's check. B, D and E. Okay, so B, D, E are correct. So a correct option is 3. Okay. Pathological withdrawal syndrome symptoms are similar enough to be lumped under the same umbrella term. We just read this statement, right? Depression and not to be called a kind of its own. The statement is definitely true, definitely false, probably true, probably false, cannot be determined. Now this statement was argued, okay, this is what was argued by the author. Now we need to see whether it is actually true or it's false or it's probably true, probably false or what. See, what does the author argues in the passage? Pathological withdrawal syndromes symptoms are similar enough to be lumped under the same umbrella term depression and not to be called a kind of its own. The statement is definitely true. Can it be definitely true? No, it cannot be definitely true because, and it cannot also be definitely false because here the author, okay, the author is actually trying to argue. The author is not presenting his some research, results that she or he did a particular research and this is what the result was, right? Here the author is contradicting, okay, to what Godman said in her research. Okay, so it cannot be definitely true and it cannot be definitely false because this is, we cannot make it a fact because this is only an argumentative view. Now cannot be determined. नहीं, probably true and probably false. So if we say probably false, okay, is this probably false? Yeah, it can be probably false. Okay, sorry, it cannot be probably false because there is, okay, there is space, okay, for this statement to be true. The pathological withdrawal syndrome, we know that it shares similar symptoms to that of depression, right? Now we also know that pathological withdrawal syndrome do not exclusively, okay, it is not a totally, an independently natural kind of its own, right? Hence it can be probably true. The pathological withdrawal syndrome symptoms are similar enough to be lumped under the same umbrella term depression and not to be called a kind of its own, because we see what the author is trying to argue, right, is right. We see that what the author is trying to argue. So according to that, PWS do not exist as a totally independent natural kind, okay, share its symptoms with depression, okay, and that is why it might be a variant of depression and not a kind of its own. Hence this statement can be probably true. Okay, now question 4, which of the following correctly defines historical grounding? Historical grounding, we came across this type of grounding, right? This is one of the two groundings, right, that we studied in the passage. So historical grounding, genetic mutation brought by the nature in the individual. Okay, so let's go back to the passage. Historical grounding, if you remember what was historical grounding, so it was what? See, historical grounding was based on the family tree, right? The grounding which is based on the family tree or the family history, right? See, historical grounding on the other hand allows us to make generalizations about the kind based on their family tree. Okay, and what do we mean by family tree? Family tree means the family history, right? What history do you share with your parents, or what your parents had, and then did you have the same thing or not? All right, or not just your parents but your grandparents, or throughout your generation. So family tree, okay, if you share same quality within the family, right, that can be a it can be a disease as well, it can be a disorder as well, right? For example, a father or a grandfather had depression, so there are chances that the child would also have depression, right? So which of the following correctly define historical grounding? Genetic mutation brought by the nature in the individual. Nowhere it talks about mutation, genetic mutation brought by the nature in the individual, so it won't be. The psychological properties inherited through parents, yes, that's what it talks about, right? The properties or traits, okay, you inherited from your parents. History of an individual's past life, no, there is nothing in the historical grounding that talks about an individual's past life. We aren't talking about individual's life, right? We're talking about the family history. Okay, properties that the family members share, yes, right? Properties or traits that the family member share. Environmental influencing one's psychology. Okay, so environmental influencing one's psychology, no. Family history and environmental influence, these two are different things, so it won't be. Now we see our correct options, the B and D. So can we find B and D? Yes, only B and D are correct, so our correct option would be 3. Now question 5. Okay, which of the following is the tone of the passage? Now we need to see the tone of the passage, right? That what is the tone that the author is talking in? Okay, so belligerent, euphemistic, introspective, sarcastic, and speculative. So belligerent is what? Belligerent is a tone when you talk in a harsh tone, in a strict tone, or in a rough tone. But do we see that the author talks anywhere near to this? No, right? So belligerent won't. Euphemistic is a tone where you talk or where you share some harsh, or rough, you convey your rough message in an indirect manner, right? In soft way, right? You feel, right? you're angry inside you, right? You feel the anger inside you, or you're rough from inside, right? But what your way of expressing that is in a soft manner. So we don't see, okay, there is like no reason for the author to feel like that, right? Introspective is what? To think about self, है ना? To think, to look inside you and to come up with some better ideas, okay, in order to try to understand yourself. But it won't be introspective. Sarcastic is what? When you mock someone, okay, which is done in sardonic manner, right? Sardonic means what? In an insulting way, in a humorous way, right? Humorous plus insulting, right? So sarcastic would be what? When you tell something or when you say something to hurt someone, right, or to make fun of someone, but in a way that it doesn't totally look insulting, right? So that is what sarcastic. So the author nowhere talks in sarcastic manner. Now speculative is what? Speculative is to come up with some ideas, with some argumentations, right, with some altercations to understand something, right? So this is what speculative is. So what the author is trying to do, okay, the author is trying to come up with, you know, his or her own concepts and to give his or her ideas, okay, to argue what Godman, the researcher, okay, said. So it's going to be speculative. The author is trying to understand or trying to speculate the research that was done in order to try to understand it in a better way. Question 6. Which is a synonym of the word erroneously? So synonyms means same meaning, okay, and for the word erroneously. Now the meaning of error, okay, it comes from error only, right? Error means something which is false, right? Something which is wrong. Now erroneous means what? Error is a noun, right? And erroneous would be a thing that contains an error. And erroneously, okay, so erroneously would be an adverb, right? So erroneously, if you see for the synonym, apt, accurate are synonyms of one another. These two means something that is right. So these two cannot be the synonym to it. Aromatic, okay, means something that has an aroma, okay, a good fragrance, a good smell. So it cannot be. Erotic cannot be as well, because erotic means something related to sexual, you know, pleasure, right, or sexual thing, right? So erotic, these four words do not match with this. So what remains is fallacious. So what the word fallacious means? Fallacious, fallacy, okay, fallacy means error, okay, some mistakes. Now fallacious is an adjective that means something that contains fallacy, something that contains any errors or any mistakes. Question 7. The passage contains two contrasting words, intrinsic and extrinsic. We saw it, right? Intrinsic, where it means something that's naturally exists in you or that is inborn, while extrinsic means something that you obtain from the external environment, right? So now similarly find the antonym for cluster. Now if you remember now here we need to find what? The antonym, that means the opposite word. Now if you remember, I had told you the meaning of cluster, right? The word cluster means what? The word cluster means something that is organized, an organized structure. Right? So cluster is that. Now we need to find the antonym. So dissimilitude means what? Dissimilitude means difference, right? Discrepancy, something that differentiates. Disperse means what? Disperse means to spread, to scatter. So if you see, cluster is what? An organized system, an organized structure, while disperse means to spread, right? To disperse, right? So the correct answer would be B, disperse. But we see the other options. Altercation means argumentations, right? When you argue. Generalization is, you know, it is the categorization based on what? The similarity. When you use your previous experiences to take the present decision, okay, when you generalize that, you know, if it had happened if it happened like this, okay, in the previous situation, so it's going to happen the same in the same way this time as well. So that generalization. Now what is latitudinarian? So it is what? when a person, okay, it is a person where he is very independent, okay, he's very independent, and in terms of religions, right, when he doesn't strictly has a concept that this is how it is going to be, or this is how the place of worship is going to be, or this is how the way of worship has to be, right? So when he is free, so it can be a synonym to freedom as well, right? Now, okay, so the correct would be dispersed. Now 8, which of the following is the theme of the passage? So now this is your last question. Now here we need to see the theme of the passage, that what the passage was majorly concerned about, and through which you can find then the theme of the passage, right? What it majorly talked about. So pathological withdrawal syndrome and its similarity with depression, right? It seems so, that pathological withdrawal syndrome, because it had largely talked about pathological withdrawal syndrome and its similarity with depression, the author was trying to argue the same, that whether the pathological withdrawal syndrome, PWS, should be considered a natural kind of its own, or should it be a variant of depression? And that was based on what? Its similarity with depression. Pathological withdrawal syndrome, a new variant of depression. Pathological withdrawal syndrome, a new variant of depression. If you see this theme, this title, right? So, a new variant of depression, okay? In the passage, we don't come to any conclusion that whether it is actually a new variant of depression. Okay, the author is arguing, the author is discussing, okay, he or she has not yet come with the conclusion, so it cannot be. Depression in its kinds. Now we are just told about one variant, and that can be possibly or not one kind. Importance of grounding to understand natural kinds. The grounding has been just told, right? Or it has been just introduced, okay, to the readers to get the clarity that whether pathological withdrawal syndrome should come under depression or should it be a natural kind of its own, right? So this is not the main concern of the passage. Complexities in segregating the natural kinds. Once again, it's almost same. Okay, so we are not really talking about how to segregate the natural kinds. Okay, it would just told us to understand the main concern, right? So the correct answer would be pathological withdrawal syndrome and its similarity with depression in the passage, because the author is trying to argue the same thing, okay, that these both, okay, share the same symptoms, okay, with each other. All right, and then further it talks whether it should be a variant of depression, the pathological withdrawal syndrome, or should it be a natural kind of its own. Okay, so that's what for today is, right? I hope you liked this session and found it productive. So we will meet next time, okay, with the same sessions. So see you next time. Have a good day. Bye bye.